Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeff Duncan-Andrade.
So the talk that I'm going to do today is actually based on an article that I wrote for the Harvard Ed Review a few years back. So if there's stuff that comes up for you during the talk that really resonates, or that you want to do a deeper dive on, you can pull down a lot of the references that I make throughout the talk on that article, and you can Google search my name and that title. That's actually the title of the research article as well. And almost certainly get a PDF of it from the Google. So I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And as the youngest, I often felt like it was my birthright to complain. Anyway, one time I came in the house and I was ranting and raving about something. I don't remember what it was. And my mother stops me in the middle of my rant, and she points at the kitchen table and she says, "Sit down." She goes in the kitchen and she takes a glass and she fills it halfway with water, and she comes back and she sets the glass down between us, and she sits down and she points at the glass and she says, "Half full or half empty?" And my mom's was good for those kind of trick questions where there is no right answer, so whatever answer you give is the wrong answer, and that's the lesson that you need right now. And so I just kind of stared back blankly. I didn't take the bait. And my mother says, "Son, how you choose to answer that question is how you will live your life. Because your life will always be both half full and half empty. And if you choose to see your life as half empty, if you choose to see your life for all the things that you don't have, you will never fill your cup. But if you can see your life as half full, if you can see your life for the things that you do have, you will fill your cup, it will overflow, and you can share that with others." Now, this is precisely what I think that Tupac Shakur means when he talks about young people growing up in poverty as the roses that grow from concrete. And you can come down wherever you want on Pac. Okay, Cornel West says, "No one free of spot or wrinkle." Okay, and I agree. I think Tupac deserves to be critiqued for some of the things that he said, some of the things that he did, some of the ways that he lived his life, but who doesn't? What is undeniable to me, as a 22-year veteran of the classroom in my community in East Oakland, as a community member from the 3400 block of East Oakland, as a father of 2 boys, and as a researcher, I challenge you to find anyone in late modernity that has had the reach to teach across all the lines that we say we want to cross as educators: race, class, gender, political boundaries, that Tupac Shakur has had. About 10 years ago, I started working with the Maori community in New Zealand. And then for those of you not familiar with the indigenous politic of the globe, the Maori are the indigenous people of New Zealand. Okay? Their kids do about as well in school in the aggregate, okay, as folks of African descent, Rasa descent, indigenous descent in the United States. Okay? And if you take a pin, if you have a map of the world, you take a pin and you drop it on my block, 3400 East Oakland, and then you take a pin and you drop it in Otara, which is the community just outside of Auckland where I've been working for the last decade with Maori schools. It is literally the other side of the world. Okay, so I'm not being hyperbolic here when I said I was on the other side of the world. And my first meeting was with a group of about 25 high school Maori youth. And I walk in the room, and they're all sitting in a circle, and this one young brother hops up, and he runs up to me and says, "You're from Oakland?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he says, "Did you know Tupac?" And I'm like, yo, I'm all the way across the world. And the first question out of a young person's mouth is about Pac. I can tell you, as a 2-decade-long veteran of the high school English classroom, that I can take a crisp $100 bill and stick it inside of any Shakespearean text and leave that text anywhere in my classroom, and it is completely safe. But if I leave Pac's book of poetry out, and a lot of folks don't know Pac wrote a book of poetry. Okay, that's actually the title of his book of poetry. It's also the title of probably his best-known poem in that book of poetry. If I leave that book of poetry out anywhere in my classroom, it is immediately snatched up by the very same kids that the system is convinced are not interested in literacy. Okay? I tell superintendents, I tell principals, I tell teachers, I told Arnie Duncan to his face, that it's not that young people aren't interested in literacy. It's that they're not interested in the literacy we're giving them. Okay? Those are two fundamentally different ways to understand the challenges that we're trying to wrestle with. As long as we keep blaming kids, as long as we keep thinking that kids are the problem and this generation is so out of control, the same stuff that they said about your generation, the same stuff they said about my generation, we conveniently forget when we're not youth anymore and now we grown and now it's them that's crazy. Okay? If we turn the lens onto the system, if we turn the lens onto an institution that is historically, for decades, marginalized the exact same group of young people in this society, the most vulnerable youth, have always been disconnected from the institution of school. And it is because the institution of school refuses to turn the mirror on itself, to look at the ways in which the practices, the habits, the habitus, the cultural norms that we've created in these institutions are by default set up to not be able to support the young people in this society that need us the most. And so if we can flip the lens and begin to start listening to different sets of voices, then what we find in the research over and over and over again is in the spaces where those kids are suddenly connected, okay, that's the lens that's being used. Okay? It's POC's lens. Right? And so it wasn't about trying to be like as cool as POC. What I wanted to understand as a teacher, as a researcher, as a father, and as a community member is what is it about POC's message that has been so transcendent? How do I distill out the things that are still gravitate? POC was killed in 96. And the young people you work with are still bumping POC. Truth be told, some of y'all drove in today bumping POC. Okay? POC's crossing these generational lines. It's not hip-hop either. Because if it was hip-hop, then young people today would still be listening to Public Enemy. They'd still be listening to Chris. They'd still be listening to Wu-Tang. They'd still be listening to Dre. They're not, though. They're not. But they're still listening to POC. So there is something in his message, okay, that from those four different positions that I simultaneously occupy, I wanted to understand, to distill that out, to make sure that when young people walk in my classroom, that my classroom is as compelling or more compelling than POC's message. Because right now we're losing. We're losing to Xbox. We're losing to PlayStation. We're losing to YouTube. We're losing the hearts and minds of our children because those things, frankly, are more compelling. Those institutions spend tons of R&D money to understand what kids want, what they want to hear, what will they pay for, what will they draw them in, and what do? We give them Pearson and Harcourt and lies and things that are fundamentally disconnected to the material conditions of their lives. And so they reject school, and then we blame them for it. And many times they end up with you because we don't only blame them for it, we lock them up for it. And so we're contributing to the very problem we say we're trying to resolve, right? But there are different messages that we can begin to tap into that are truly resonating in the hearts of young people, particularly the young people that find themselves the most disconnected from school. And I think POC is a really good starting point for that. And so as a way to frame up the conversation that I want to have today, I'm going to play POC reading this poem. Now, Tupac actually read this poem on multiple tracks. The one that's probably the best known is a song called Mama's Just a Little Girl. And into that song, he reads this poem over the beat of that song. So I'm going to play that for us right now to frame up some of the conversation I want to have today.
To ask us why we turn from bad to worse is to ignore from which we came. Mama's just a little girl. You see, you wouldn't ask why the rose that grew from the concrete had damaged petals. On the contrary, we would all celebrate its tenacity. We would all love its will to reach the...
is precisely the same message that my mother was giving me at the kitchen table that day. And what Pac points out in this poem is how absurd it would be if you and Naomi are walking down the street and you see a rose growing in the concrete. And you turn to the homie, you're like, a rose in the concrete. And the homie turns back to you and says, yeah, but what a shame. It has damaged petals. Of course it has damaged petals. Fool, it's growing in concrete. But we do this all the time with young people, don't we? We focus on their damaged petals instead of on their tenacity and the will to reach the sun. We see them as a glass half empty instead of as a glass half full. They are both. They do have damaged petals. They also have tenacity and will to reach the sun. That's our choice as the grown folks in the relationship, as the people with the most power in the relationship. We choose how we see these babies. And that choice drives nearly everything that happens next. Because kids know, particularly the kids that we serve. Because the only way they survive the streets, the only way they survive the toxicity that's in their lives is learning how to immediately read how you see me, how you value me or don't. Okay? And I will know in a matter of seconds if I have to protect myself from you or if I can be vulnerable around you. Okay? And that read is hard to undo. Okay? First impressions with vulnerable people have massive impacts on their relationships with those people. Now, if we're going to really see young people as glasses half full, for their assets, for their tenacity and their will to reach the sun, okay, we've got to do a much better job of understanding the concrete in our field. Of all the stuff I've read, all the experts that I've met with, okay, nothing has more profoundly impacted my day-to-day practice as a classroom educator than this film series. It's a 6-part film series from PBS called Unnatural Causes. It has an amazing website, tons of resources for teachers, okay? And it is a global study of this question: is inequality making us sick? Okay. Short answer? What do you think? Okay. Yes, widely agreed upon across fields. Social epidemiology, public health, neuroscience, the medical field, all agree. Biggest threat to health on the planet is inequality. So LACOE, okay, if you're going to develop healthy schools, healthy cultures, healthy communities, according to all of the research across fields, at the very top of your priority list must be the eradication of all forms of inequality. There cannot be an oppression Olympics. Okay, you cannot prioritize one form of inequality over the other. You can't say we're going to deal with racial inequality and ignore gender inequality. You can't say we're going to deal with gender inequality and ignore class inequality. Okay? All forms of inequality on the table all the time. Suffering is intolerable. Okay? And until that gets normed in our schools, until suffering is eradicated for the children in our society, this society will continue to reproduce stratified, normed, institutionalized inequality because we're not doing anything generationally to disrupt that. Okay? That's why you're so powerful. Because all of the research suggests, okay, that we can literally interrupt this massive stratified quasi-social inequality, okay, social apartheid that we have created in this society in one generation. We could literally change that in one generation because we have these babies for 13 years before they pop out into young adulthood at 18 years old. And there was a period in this society where we actually started to move on that. In the 1970s, the United States had the smallest gap in income inequality in the history of the nation. Most people don't know that. That's in most of our lifetimes. And then between the period of 1980 and present day, the United States completely reversed all of that income inequality progress, and we now have the largest gap in income inequality in the history of the industrialized world. Not just in the history of the United States. We're the champs in inequality. Okay? And we did that in 3 decades. And that was all based on a set of economic, social, political, and educational policies that created stratified outcomes that are so predictable that Vegas won't even lay odds on them. But the good news is that we have hard evidence, okay, that we can push it the other way. Because we've done it before, we know what the policies were, we know what the investments were, we know what the practices were. And the 70s were far from perfect. Ask black and brown folks in this room about the 70s, and they'll tell you. But we do know that we were headed in a much better direction within most of our lifetimes, which means in our lifetime, we can start pushing back in that direction. But it's got to be a conscious effort, and we got to know that this is possible. Now, to figure out the starting point, I can't help you much there. What I can do is provide a list of things that we know permeate the concrete. The concrete is toxic, it's multi-layered, it's complex, and it's always context-specific. Now, if you ask me about my hood, if you ask me about East Oakland, I can tell you where we need to start. What I cannot tell you is where you need to start in your community. That's the work you have to do. I can provide you a good starting list because we know that these are some of the major indicators of social toxicity in our society. But what you have to do is become an ethnographer of the community that you serve. The best educators that I've been around on this planet are first and foremost ethnographers of the children's lives that they serve. And because they understand the hood, because they understand the block, because they understand the housing complex, because they understand the broader social implications of where they're doing the work, they know how to prioritize these things. I can't tell you that. I'm not from here. Actually, I am. I was born in LA. Okay? But I was born in 71, okay, when things were different than they are now. Okay? So what I can tell you is that in my community, this one pops out as number one, year after year after year. Oakland is consistently one of the most violent communities in the United States. In fact, so violent that in 2006, the San Francisco Chronicle decided that they wanted to map it. And they said that we had the plague, which I find interesting because, as I told you, I live in the 3400 block. I live right about there. So if we had the plague, guess what? Y'all would be in trouble. Because the plague's the ultimate non-discriminator, isn't it? It doesn't recognize race, it doesn't recognize class, it doesn't recognize gender, and it certainly doesn't recognize political boundaries. But those red lines just popped up are the political boundaries of our city. And as you can see, our plague has been almost perfectly quarantined between the 580 and the 880 freeways, what we call the flatlands or the lower bottoms. And you don't got to be a topographical genius to look at this map and tell me what the outlier is. What is it? Piedmont. Now, what the hell is going on in Piedmont where they can completely opt out of the plague? Just be like, nah, I'm cool, I don't want none. Okay? Cornel West jokes that Disneyland brags nobody's ever died on their premises. He says, somebody probably has. They just push them across the line to keep their record clean. Okay? I think that's what happened right there. I was almost certainly in Piedmont. They're like, nah, give that back to Oakland. One more, they won't care. 5 years, we had 555 homicides in a city of a little over 400,000 people. About the same numerical count as you might find in South Central, or parts of East Los or Boyle Heights, right? In 2007, the Chronicle gave up and the Oakland Tribune started mapping homicides. Now, every year on the front page of the Trib, they publish what we call the homicide map, the names, the faces, the places of everybody who's been murdered in our city. These are four of the most recent. I know in LA, they have the homicide stories in the LA Times where they try to tell the narrative, right? It's not just a dot. It's not just a kid, right? There's a story there. There's a human being. Right? And if we can humanize some of this, then maybe some of us will begin to understand that the suffering of all babies matters the same. Because we haven't created the conditions for that. We've created the conditions where the suffering of children in Beverly Hills matters more than the suffering of children from my neighborhood. Okay? There's no way that you can build a multiracial, pluralistic democracy with that kind of apartheid-like state where some people's suffering matters less than others. Right? Now, I decided that I'd update the homicide map. And I'm going to do it for 13 years because that's how many years young people are actually in schools in our public school system. This is 9 years, y'all. This kid is just coming to my 9th grade English class. And you tell me, where can a young person live in my community where they have not personally witnessed homicide, if not multiple homicides? And yet, what's the conversation about in schools? Common Core, No Child Left Behind, A through G, Casey Prep, okay? All of which matters. I went to college. I have my PhD. I understand the value of that. Okay? But in this context, to act as though this isn't even happening because I care about you, I want to focus on academic rigor. I want to focus on creating the same pathways for you as kids in Piedmont have. That's Pollyannish because I don't have the same pathways as kids in Piedmont have. And this isn't to say that kids in Piedmont don't suffer because some of them do. But if you're not going to address this reality, if you're going to act as though when I walk through the school gates, I'm going to leave all this behind and just focus on your Harcourt, Pearson, Casey Prep exam, okay? You're not only kidding yourself, but you're morally suspect because you treat me differently than you would treat your own son and daughter because you know if your own son or daughter was living in a war zone, day one, every day, you'd be checking in on heart before head. Okay? And all of the medical science supports the need to change the approach with vulnerable youth. So are we research-based or not? Are we data-driven or not? These are just sexified terms that politicians and policymakers use that have no real function in reality on the ground in the dirt every day. But it's a mistake on their part because they said it. And they gave me a PhD. And there's no takebacks. So I know the research. And the research is actually on our side to force a pivot. And so's the data. Because kids are exposed to this level of toxic stress and trauma, all the research suggests that they are especially vulnerable to PTSD. And it's not just violence, y'all. That is not what the research on PTSD reveals. Okay? It is exposure to toxic stress, which includes poverty, home instability, spiritual instability, food insecurity, transportation insecurity, joblessness, all forms of inequality, food, clothing, shelter, safety, basic needs. If any of those are under threat, you are prone to PTSD. So sure, if you see a homicide, okay, you are, right? But if you are constantly food insecure, okay, you are also have the same level of biochemical reaction as somebody who's seen a homicide. But that's largely ignored in the conversation because most of the conversation about PTSD is about this dude, which is right because soldiers are particularly prone to PTSD, but nobody's talking about these brothers. These are my students. This is me on the camera. This is us burying another one of my students, a 16-year-old stabbed more than a dozen times in the face with a screwdriver about 6 blocks from my house. And that's who buried him. And the next day, we back at school. And what's the conversation about? Casey Prep. Academic rigor. We're going to make sure you guys graduate. We're going to make sure you guys go to college. Acting as though this didn't even happen. And the minute that is the opening conversation after that happens, Herb Cole said it best. When he said, kids don't care what you know till they know that you care. He wrote a book called I Won't Learn From You, where he describes young people like these who engage in what he called willed not learning. I literally will not learn from you to protect myself from your moral obtuseness about the material conditions of my life. But with those teachers that actually engage this, that use this as the pathway to KC Prep, that use this as the pathway to A through G, what we find is that these kids are hyper engaged there. They literally cut other classes to stay in that teacher's class. Right? So we know that another way is possible. We also have hard evidence that that other way creates the very engagement and outcomes we all rhetorically say we want from these babies. The best description about why that change in approach to kids matters most is given in this book, as far as the stuff that I've read. Okay, this book, The Boy Who Raised as a Dog, is written by the nation's leading expert on child trauma, a medical doctor named Bruce Perry. Okay? And what Bruce reveals, okay, is that the national data suggests 1 in 3 urban youth display the symptoms of mild to severe PTSD. So if you guys worked exclusively with soldiers that have just returned from live combat, how much time would you spend training on PTSD? A day? A week? Constant? It'd be constant because you already know the deal. But this is how I know you're not data-driven. Because the data suggests that urban youth are actually twice as likely as that population to have PTSD. When Bruce Perry compares the national data set on youth trauma to the Pentagon's data on military trauma, what he found is that youth are twice as likely as a soldier returning from live combat to have PTSD. That's the data. So if you're data-driven, then connect the dots here that we've got to become trauma responsive if we're really going to get the most vulnerable youth to engage. But it's even deeper than that. In 2011, Harvard School of Public Health said, actually, these young people don't have PTSD. Because PTSD stands for what? Post-traumatic. Okay? So in 2011, Harvard School of Public Health released an entirely new diagnosis called CPTSD to capture what they're seeing in the brains and the biochemical activity of young people who are experiencing recurring toxic stress. It's even more complex in the babies because they're not exiting the battlefield. They're constantly returning to it. They're constantly being re-exposed to new layers of toxic stress and trauma. And the reason that this matters so much is because of this cocktail. This is the deadly cocktail for health outcomes. The accumulation of multiple negative stressors without resources to cope. That describes the kids that are struggling the most in school. They're stacking negative stressors. They're experiencing racial inequality. They're experiencing gender inequality. They're experiencing economic inequality. They're experiencing social inequality. They're being harassed by the police. They're being harassed by their landlord. They can't get a job. And it's just stressor after stressor after stressor, and there's nowhere to turn for resources. That is the cocktail that creates the kid who becomes hopeless. And the reason for that is because of what's going on inside their body. The stacking of stressors in your life elevates your allostatic load. That's the term we want educators conversant in. To be able to read and understand allostatic load in your own bodies, but also in the bodies of the children that you serve. This is straight out of a medical journal from one of the leading experts on stress and load in the body, a guy named Bruce McEwen. And they've mapped, there's tons of studies like this, right? But Bruce is kind of the seminal one. So they mapped allostatic load in the body, right, under different stress conditions. Now, let me just be clear with everybody in this room. Okay? I am not standing here advocating that you attempt to live a stress-free life, right? There's only one group of people on the planet that lives a stress-free life. Right, dead people. So don't worry, your stress-free life is coming, okay? It's guaranteed. You all going to be stress-free at some point, okay? Stress is actually good for the body. Stress is actually a normal part of the human condition. It ain't no getting around. You're going to have stress. Okay? If you breathe in, you got stress. Okay? And this is what a normal stress event looks like in your body when they map it. And I'll give you an example from my life. The first time I asked my wife out, here comes the dancing piece. Okay? And people joke with my wife all the time. They're like, don't you ever get worried because he travels all over the country and he stays in hotels, he meets all these single people? And she goes, no. And they're like, well, why not? She says, because he has no game. So this is precisely true. Okay, so my no game ass is sitting over here in the corner trying to think about how I'm gonna go talk to this amazing, beautiful woman, and I am literally saying stuff to myself like this: your mom says you're handsome. Your mom says you're handsome. Your mom says you're handsome. And I start going across the room to talk to her, and what is going on inside my chest? It's pounding, right? Okay, that is what the medical field refers to as a physiological response. Okay? It is activity over time in my body, a biochemical reaction that I do not control. This is important for you to understand. You do not control your SRS. You do not control your stress response system. In fact, your stress response system is one of the most dominant systems in your body, so much so that it will literally reallocate basic resources from critical thinking into your reptilian brain. Because when your stress triggers hit, you get 3 choices and 3 choices only. I don't care who you are. This is what I do. I research this shit. Okay? So when stress hits me, I know exactly what's happening in my body. It doesn't matter. Okay? In this case, knowing is not half the battle. Okay? Knowing has 0 value. Because your stress response system is designed to kick in when you need one of 3 choices and cannot deal with any of the static or noise that comes with being a critical thinker. Okay? We call it F cubed. You know what they are? The 3 Fs? Fight, flight, don't say it, freeze. That's it. That's all. Those are your 3 choices. You can fight, you can flee, or you can freeze. And it is the same for everybody. Race, class, gender, income, zip code, same. Because you're a human being. So I'm in fight mode when I'm going across to talk to my wife. Okay? I'm also in the other F mode, right? To be crude, right? Literally, right? Your heart is pounding because you're trying to procreate. Okay? I mean, you guys want to keep it real, okay? That's literally that's why, right, when you try to talk to a person that you're physically attracted to, those biochemical reactions start happening, right? Because your body is trying to activate in a way, right, that allows you to, in this really base way, to continue the species, okay? So this is why they call it the reptilian brain. Right? It's back to your core human instinct, right, of survival. So I'm going over to talk to her, my chest is pounding, and the reason that my chest is pounding, the reason that my forearms are tightening, the reason that my jawline is tightening up, okay, is because there's all these chemicals that are rushing through my body to deal with the stress. Okay, the one that you're the most familiar with is adrenaline. Right? That's why the heart gets going. Right? The one that the medical field is the most concerned with is cortisol. Because they've been able to directly link the overproduction of cortisol to the big 4 unnatural killers in our society. Type 2 diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and cancer are all caused. First of all, they're all unnaturally occurring in the human population. Not natural. And they're all caused by the overproduction of cortisol. And what causes the overproduction of cortisol? No. Stress causes the production of cortisol. Listen carefully. I said, what causes the overproduction of cortisol? Toxic stress. Okay? So it's not stress that's bad for you. It's toxic stress. Toxic stress is what causes unnatural death. But we're not talking about toxic stress right now. I'm going to talk to my wife. Okay? That's just stress. So I get over there. I will not tell you what I said. Okay? I will not bust the move that I tried to bust. Okay? I'll tell you what she said. No. But I'll take yours. So I give her my number, right? And I'm walking away thinking that I did that thing. And all my homies are like, dude, you stupid. That's the brush off. Okay, so for all the no-game people in the room, I'm just upped your game a little bit, right? If they take your number instead of giving you theirs, that's not what you were shooting for. Fortunately, in this case, she ended up calling me, and it worked out, and now we got 2 boys. So as I'm walking away from her, okay, what's going on inside my chest? Back to normal? Okay. Slowly, right? And that's what the medical field refers to as the recovery period, right? A steady slope downward where the cortisol and the adrenaline and all those other chemicals that rush through my body to deal with the stress go back to normal levels. That is a normal stress event. That is actually good for your body. That is not what we're talking about. We are talking about toxic stress, which looks like that in the body. I joke with high school teachers all the time because for kids it's kind of like this. First period, second period, third period, fourth period. And then I joke with superintendents and principals because for teachers it's kind of like this. First period, second period, third period. So what do you notice about the slope on that graph versus the slope on the first graph? It's steeper on which side? Both. That's what kills you. That's what kills you. Because with toxic stress, it is a radical influx of those chemicals in your body with no recovery period. Because you're literally bouncing stressor to stressor to stressor. Okay? This is why the accumulation of multiple negative stressors with no recovery period is so toxic in the body. Okay? And eventually, right, it starts to look like this in the body when we measure it. Those little triangles that you see are what we refer to in the medical field as deltas. Okay, so if you really got microscopic on that, what you would start to see, even on this first tier, is this path here, where you see how now the lines are getting squiggly, they're not clean anymore. That's because the biorhythms are all over the place in this kid's body. Okay? And that can ultimately lead to this kid. This is often the kid that ends up with you. Okay? This is the kid who is hypervigilant. The stress response system never calms down. He or she is on high alert all the time. And you stay on high alert long enough, and you become this kid. This is the kid who's flatlined. This is the kid who can literally watch a homicide and be totally non-emotional. Okay? And it's not because they don't care. It's not because they're non-emotional. It's because they are literally exhausted. Their stress response system has been going at 110% for so long that they can't even muster a biochemical response anymore. They're just done. That's a process, right, that the body goes through that we can actually track and name what's causal. And if you can name what's causal, okay, you can interrupt it and begin the healing process. Some of the most compelling research on this actually comes out of the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and their School of Public Health, a woman named Arlene Geronimus. And the reason that I highlight Arlene's work, okay, is because she completely changed the conversation in the field with the way in which she chose to do her research. Because what Arlene said is, most of the research I'm seeing right now tries to isolate, okay, individual causes. So let me look at how poverty affects the body. Let me look at how racism affects the body. Let me look at how patriarchy affects the body. Let me look at how homophobia affects the body. Okay? And what Arlene said is that's an academic exercise, but that's not actually how the world works. The world tends to be an intersectionality of multiple stressors. So what I want to understand is what happens when you stack multiple stressors in somebody's life. And so she studied longitudinally the lives of poor black women. So now you get 3 toxic stressors. You got racism, you got poverty, and you got patriarchy operating on these women's bodies all day, every day, all the time. And what she found inside their bodies was literally a process of weathering, where they were literally dying from the inside out because of the stress. In 2013, this research led to the Nobel Peace Prize out of the University of California, San Francisco, which is the UC System's medical school. Because what they found was that toxic stress literally, they discovered something called a telomere, which is in all your bodies. And they can measure your telomere length and literally predict how long you will live, barring you get a car crash or something, right? And what they found is that stress literally erodes your telomeres. And so they can biologically measure your age, right? So I'm 44, right? But if they measured my telomeres, that's your literally your health age. So they're finding they did a study on a group of women who were raising children that had really severe mental or physical disabilities. And so they were just constantly under stress to care for their children. And when they measured the telomeres in these women's bodies, what they found is that biologically they were in their 40s. But internally, they were in their 60s and 70s. The insides of their bodies had aged 20 plus years just from the stress in their lives. But that's not what won the Peace Prize. What won the Peace Prize was what they found next. So by accident, they had this group of women, and they were just concerned about them because you're literally losing years on your life, and I can prove it. And so they decided to just bring the women together. And they would just meet in each other's houses, and the researchers would just resource them, give them a little bit of food and get them some child care so they could just be alone with some other women who could empathize. And what they found next won the Peace Prize. Because what started to happen just by sitting in a room on sofas and having a conversation about their lives, their bodies created an enzyme that started lengthening their telomeres. Literally lengthened their life. This is where the research is at right now. This is the kind of stuff that we're now starting to discover in the neuroscience because of the breakthroughs. And the implications for us in education are massive. They are hard medical evidence that what we do every day literally saves lives or shortens them. That's how important every interaction you have with a kid is, according to the most cutting-edge research in neuroscience and medicine. Now, somebody asked me, is the WTF slide in today? My mother's 87 years old. She has recently discovered email, which means that I get updates on Jesus all the time. I know when he's dead. I know when he's risen. I know when there's 2 sets of footprints in the sand and there's only one. And one of my older brothers, I did this talk at Harvard a few years back. It was me and Arnie Duncan. We were the 2 keynotes. Arnie went first, and then I went on and explained why everything he said was wrong. And Harvard made a big deal of it, and they videotaped it and put it on their website and blasted it all over YouTube. So one of my older brothers gets hold of the YouTube link, and he emails it to my mom. And Mom's calls me up and was like, your brother just sent me the YouTube link to your Harvard talk. I'm going to go on and watch it, and then I'm going to call you back and let you know what I think. I'm like, all right, cool, Ma. So about 90 minutes later, my mom calls me back. I said, what'd you think? She says, I think you curse too much. Good thing about my mom is she does not text message. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. It's not actually important. What is important, is that we're not screwed at all. The medical research is crystal clear on what matters, how it matters, why it matters. And what the research has found conclusively, study after study after study, into the lives of young people experiencing toxic stress, is that the single biggest protective factor in that child's life is a caring adult. Now, careful now, because I want you to hear what I said, and I want you to hear what I didn't say. What I said is a caring adult. What I didn't say was a caring, licensed adult. And that's the mistake we've been making. We've been investing in programs instead of people. We've been investing in process instead of people. We cannot predict which adult that child will connect to. So it has to be all hands on deck all the time. It might be the school secretary. It might be the security guard. It might be the custodian. It might be the bus driver. It might be the person that serves the lunch. It might be the principal. It might be the counselor. It might be the English teacher. All hands on deck, old school. Back to our own ancestors. Every one of you comes from a group of ancestors that had the same adage that African peoples had all throughout the continent, which is that it takes a village to raise a child, and it is the village's responsibility to raise every child. But we've gotten into a process where we assign those roles to certain adults, and sometimes kids just don't connect to that adult. We create dumbass mentorship programs where it's like, here's your mentor. Mentor, be menteed. I'm not against mentorship, right? But that's an organic process where we have to choose each other, right? The grown folk has to choose the child, and the child has to choose the grown folk. Right? And so we've got to understand that an investment in all our people is what's truly going to make a healthy school community, a healthy, broader community, in a way that all the young people connect to the people that they really need at that particular moment. And what's most compelling about this research is the why. What they found is that there is a direct correlation between the number of caring adults a vulnerable child has and their hope levels. The medical field is literally measuring hope now because it is the only indicator that they found in vulnerable youth life that has a direct corollary to whether or not they successfully navigate the toxic stress. And the higher the hope levels, the higher the success level for the kid. And what they found is the primary indicator of hope levels is the number of caring adults. And it's literally 1-to-1. So the kid who has one caring adult, right, is half as likely as the kid who has two caring adults, and so on and so forth. So the more we stack caring adults in kids' lives, the more likely that they successfully move through the toxic stress. Now, I'm not telling you anything you don't intuitively understand through your ancestors, through your indigeneity. You already know this. Okay? What I'm doing is providing you with the fact that the most rigorous research in the nation on how to meet this challenge supports your instincts. The question is how are we going to structure and institutionalize the best of our instincts and the best of our ancestors over some of these things that are much more about program than they are about people. Now, here's why hope matters so much. Now, I told you I'm an English teacher, so I like the word hope. If you look the word hope up in a dictionary, you'll find it's both a noun and a verb. It's a dynamic word. It's a thing and an action. Okay? And the research that's coming out is quite compelling. Okay? Some of the most groundbreaking stuff came out of psychology originally from this dude named Charles Schneider, right? Who developed something he called he developed something he calls hope theory, okay? And he measures hope using something he calls the Children's Hope Scale. Okay, I literally use the Children's Hope Scale in my high school classroom. That's what I baseline. I don't baseline literacy. I don't baseline attendance. I don't baseline any of that stuff. I baseline hope. Because I know if I move the meter on hope, all those other things that the state is measuring take care of themselves. And you can do your own diligence on me. Okay? You can see I'm not going to put up my data slides here. But you'll see that the data that I've gotten over the last 2 decades, and our program has gotten over the last 2 decades, and we don't cream. We work with the same kids you work with, the kids that are in and out of juvie. Okay? And we've been able to produce uncommon levels of success that are equivalent to what you see in Piedmont, okay? With that group of kids, because we focus on what matters most first. Okay? And the truth is that most people don't believe that with those kids you can do it. Most people believe you can get one of them. Right? And so we come up with dumbass slogans like, if I can just teach one. Okay? And we've already built in the excuse for the other 19 that we won't be teaching. Okay? That has to change. Okay? It's not good enough to just teach one. We got to find a way to get every single one of them, okay? If we're really committed to the rhetoric. Otherwise, let's just say it. Let's just stop bullshitting our children and just say most of y'all aren't going to make it. Some of y'all are. And I'll work with you. Okay? And at least then, right, we're going to keep it 100. And the kids will respect that. Right? But it's the lies that we care about all of you. Except for when you have really tough problems. Because then that's really inconvenient for my caring structure. That's, literally like those are the systems that we've built. Okay? And kids see that, right? And then the real problem is how it ripples to you. Because if your colleagues do that, when you say, I care about y'all, okay, then doubt has already seeped in. Right? And so you got extra hurdles to get over because of the legacy of inequality that we've built into schools and communities. Right? So we all got to be on deck with this work. Now, my favorite definition of hope actually comes from social epidemiology. Presidential professor at UC Berkeley School of Public Health, a guy named Lynn Syme, defines hope as a sense of control of destiny. Now, I don't know why y'all got in this work. That's why I got in this work. Because I wanted young people in my community to have a greater sense of control over their own destiny. And so what one of my students told me, and then she made shirts for it, okay? She said, you're a hope dealer. And I was like, hell yeah. Okay? Standing amongst dope dealers, right? I'm a hope dealer. And I'm not talking about the D-boys on my corner. I'm talking about the D-boys inside the schools where I work. Schools are dealing dope. Okay, real talk. Stuff that is toxic for the veins, toxic for the heart, toxic for the mind. Okay? And so you either a dope dealer or you a hope dealer. Okay? And if you're a hope dealer, right, then you understand that your primary responsibility is to create the conditions where kids control their own destiny. Now, the more I've done this research, the more I realize I'm not onto anything new. I'm simply holding up the paradigm of the ancestors. But the problem is that this country is profoundly ahistorical. Folks act as if history began in 1776 and everything before that is irrelevant. Most folks in this country don't know their true indigeneity. They don't know their own indigenous land. They don't know their own indigenous language. They don't know their own indigenous culture. They don't know their own indigenous foods. They've lost track of the teachings of the ancestors. And schools have been implicit and complicit in that. Okay? And so we've got a generation of grown folks leading a generation of young people. And that generation of grown folks look good above the earth. We got degrees. We got a nice trunk, strong trees, cool leaves, but no roots. So when the storm comes in the form of a 16-year-old who just watched 3 of his homies get wetted up on the block, we go down because we don't got the roots to hold us up in that storm. And we're raising generations of children, strong branches, broad trunks, no roots. This is how you get young people showing up to schools with AK-47s letting loose on babies. Something's got to change. Something's got to change. And you go back to the teachings of the ancestors and you track back who you really come from. I don't care who you come from. You'll find the same thing that I find when I track back my people. My people are from the Mayan and the Mexica. And the Mayans taught all our children one core principle. And it was in LACOE. Now, I learned about in LACOE because I had the privilege of working with the Raza Studies program in Tucson Unified for many years, and those folks taught me a lot about my people. And I say that to you because it's not too late. I really started learning these principles in my life in my 30s. I continued to study. We tell young people that learning is a lifetime experience, but then we don't model that as grown folks. Start with yourself. Find out who you come from. Start getting deep roots. And if you do that work, I don't care what continent your people come from. Your people, all people, had a core concept like in LACOE. This is not a Mayan principle. This is a human principle of the most successful civilizations. In LACOE is the story of the smoking mirror. It is the concept that we teach our children, that I now teach my sons, 2.5-year-old twins. And I teach them every night in the bath about in LACOE. And what we teach them is, every living being you come across, son, is a smoking mirror. That is not the question. The question is whether you will muster the courage, character, and commitment to clear the smoke away. Because if you do, what will you see? You will see yourself in every other living being. And ultimately, that's the challenge. Can we build an educational paradigm that privileges that understands that that is what knowledge is? That is the teaching of the ancestors. That is what will right the ship. That is what leads to engagement, test scores, college going, because that is what leads to purpose. Okay? Income, profession are not purpose. But our connection to one another is. And all of the biochemical registers reveal that now that we can actually measure what goes on inside the body, inside the heart, and inside the brain. The way we try to do this is by emphasizing not just hope, but a particular kind of hope, because I think there's forms of false hope that get peddled in schools that we need to avoid. So I want to emphasize critical hope, which is a sort of trifecta, the holy trinity of hope, so to speak. And if you're a betting person, you know that a trifecta is a bet that has 3 components, and you don't win the bet unless you hit on all 3. Critical hope's the same. So if you only hit on 2 of these, okay, kids' hope levels won't get where you want them to get. You got to hit on all 3. Now, I wrestled them apart for the purposes of our conversation, so I'll start with the first, which is material hope, which is first and foremost, just be badass at what you do. Just be the dopest custodian ever in the history of the planet. Be the dopest front office person ever. Be the dopest HR person ever. Get folks hired. Okay? Bump their salary a little bit by accident. Okay, ain't nothing wrong with a little extra. Look, see, you just created hope. Folks are like, oh, shit, I can get a raise. Yeah. Soup was a little uncomfortable with that one, though. He went right to the budget and made sure we can afford it. Just being good at what you do is a huge material resource for kids from our communities. If every stop they hit is high functioning, high commitment, right? High value, high hope, that has a ripple effect. It's not just the classroom teacher. It's across the deck. Everybody on deck all the time, but that won't be enough. You will have to supplement. You will have to give out food. You will have to give out rides. You will have to find a way to get the material resources to kids that allow them to unlock their dreams. Now, when we do this, when we provide material hope, this is what closes the gap between the most pressing needs kids tend to have. Hunger, housing, clothing, transportation, jobs, and what we offer them. And closing that gap is fundamental to increasing engagement and outcomes. But we've known that since 1943. For 70 years, we've ignored Maslow at our own peril. Maslow, for 7 decades, has been widely correlated across fields: public health, social epidemiology, neuroscience, the medical field, child development, psychology, have all signed on to Maslow study after study after study after study. Affirm, he's right, he's right, he's right. So he's right. What's so deep to me as an educator about Maslow's work is the pinnacle, self-actualization. The most successful students self-actualize. It's what every one of you wants from every kid you contact. You want a self-actualizing kid. You give them one thing to do, she goes and does 6. Well, the beauty of Maslow is first and foremost the conclusion that self-actualization is the natural human condition. So any kid that is not self-actualizing is not broken. Stop trying to fix these babies. They're not broken. If a child or a person you work with is not self-actualizing, there's your hierarchy. That is why. These are the only things that research supports as interrupters to self-actualization. That's it. That's all. So there's the paradigm. There's the investments. And it starts at the base. Anybody who is food insecure, naked, please tell me that you guys recognize when kids come to school naked. Okay? That's a clear indicator of problems. Okay? But I'm talking about the kid who comes to school, right, in inadequate clothing. Right? So pay attention to what kids are wearing. Pay attention to the kid who's wearing the same clothes day after day after day. Shelter and safety. Okay? And when we talk about safety, we don't just mean physical safety. It's spiritual safety. It's emotional safety. Okay? It's identity safety. Can kids be who they are? Right? Or do we keep telling them to pull up their pants? Pull up the pants. Fix your hat. Fix your shirt. Fit our image of good. Okay? That is literally a threat to their safety. And we say it's key to their safety. Okay? It doesn't line up. Right? Now, it's not that you don't get kids to pull up their pants. Right? It's about the conversation and the way it happens. Right? If it's punitive, if it's I have power and you don't, and so you do what I say because those are the rules, that is literally toxic. It's toxic to you, and it's toxic to them. Now, if you get those 4 stable, then they can move here. Only then can they fully accept love and understand what it means to belong. So do the spaces you create. Use the word love and mean it. Do they create a space where kids feel like they belong? This is my space. This is my school. I have a role here. And if you get that right, then do kids learn to love themselves? This is the Ethnic Studies Project. So many of the kids that you are working with hate themselves. They hate their skin color. They hate their eye color. They hate their hair texture. They hate their body image. They hate the language that they speak. They hate the community that they come from. They hate their family. They hate their hood. They hate their history because they've never been taught it. And as long as a child has self-hate, it is impossible for them to self-actualize. And it is the self-hate component that leads kids to pull triggers on other kids that look just like them. No way you pull a trigger on somebody that you think is beautiful. So you have to hate yourself to kill your brother. You have to hate yourself to kill your sister. And we are complicit in that process if we have had those babies for 9, 10 years and they don't love themselves. 8 hours a day for 10 years. How's a 10th grader hate themselves? What has happened for them to not learn how beautiful they are and how valuable they are and about their people? And let me be clear with you about the Ethnic Studies Project. The Ethnic Studies Project is not a project for people of color. White folks need them some ethnic studies. Okay? We all need to understand, right, how beautiful we are and the origins of our people so we stop harming each other. Okay? And you can't do that if you don't first love yourself. Second is what we call Socratic hope. This is a term I borrow from Cornel West, who talks about the need for a Socratic sensibility. Right? And West says that young people don't want to hear any more sermons. They want to see one. Okay? And we all know this, right? If you got kids, you know this. That kids don't care what you say. They care what you do. And if what you do and what you say don't line up, they no longer listen to what you say. Okay? Make the way you live your life your sermon. And then you don't got to say nothing because they already know. Okay? But we're quick to talk and slow to show. And that's why so many kids don't invest in school, because schools have upheld hypocrisy for so long. Okay? And the one thing that kids have so much better than us as grown folks is bullshit meters. I mean, their BS meters are so on point. And as you grow up, you learn how to put your BS meter away because you learn to accept BS. It's just part of the deal, right? But young people, they don't get that. They're like, no, you said, okay? But you didn't do. That don't make sense to me. And so be careful what you say, and be more careful about what you do. Because when those really start lining up, then kids tend to gravitate to those individuals, and they call them riders. Because they know that you're going to ride, okay? And that word is bond. Now, for me, this is the gap, the like-love gap, okay? Which is most important for us to understand. Because you see, a lot of folks that I work with coming into my community and communities like mine, okay, are outsiders to our community. And they know they're outsiders. Okay? And so they don't want no beef, right? They try to be like Switzerland. They just try to keep it cool with everybody, right? They just want to be friends. Okay? They want everybody to like them. Okay? They don't want to be called a racist. They don't want to be called a classist. They don't want to be called a sexist. So they just try to keep it cool with everybody. And because they work so hard to be liked, they are never loved. And the problem with the conversation about love in this society is that profoundly Pollyannish. The definition of love in this society is primarily based on the Notebook. It is shocking to me how every time I tell that joke, people get it. Okay? I don't even like the Notebook. My wife makes me watch it. Okay? She's like, this is what it needs to be like. And you see in a Notebook, right, there's no conflict. There's strife, there's struggle, but there's no conflict, right? And a Notebook ends with two people who spent their entire lives together, fall asleep in bed, and that's it. They check out. That's how it goes out. And if you're really in love, that's how your marriage will end. You guys will die together in bed. There you go. And if you don't got that, you ain't got shit. Okay, so don't even tell me we in love because we fight. Okay, that can't be love because I seen a Notebook. Okay, and even when you cuckoo, right, you lost your faculties, right? I'm still loving you. I'm still showing up every day to remind you who you are. Okay, that's the problem, right? Is that we've let this city define love for the nation, Hollywood. Right? Love from the ancestors. Love is not the absence of conflict. Love is the presence of conflict with the courage, character, and commitment to find your way through. Okay? I know, I'm married. Okay? You got to fight for love. Okay? You got to fight. Okay? Some people understand me way too well because you're close to it right now. You're close to it. You're close to it. Okay? I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to prove it to you. Everybody in this room understands you got to fight for love. Okay? I'm going to prove it to you. Okay? Show of hands, how many of you has ever had a personal relationship go bad? Okay, that's why I love educators, okay, and leaders, because they just lie, okay? You see what he did? He crossed his arms and looked over his shoulder like, not me. Every relationship that ended went exactly as I planned. Okay? That's the same as me, bro. Like, you don't ever see me raise my hand on that. Okay? I got it all under control. Okay? So, I did this talk for in Texas. You can imagine how I go over in Texas. But it's all right because I was in Austin, which isn't really Texas, right? So I'm doing it for all of Austin Unified. It's like 2,000 teachers, right? And I asked that question. 1,999 teachers raised their hand. One person lied. And there's one woman, she's sitting right on the aisle, and there's Mike set up down the aisle for Q&A, and she leans over and grabs a mic and goes, yeah. And he's right there. That was precisely my reaction. I was like, go ahead. This would be way more interesting than anything I have to say. Yeah, I want to see some trauma. Here it comes. So I'm talking about the one where you got your heart stomped out. I'm talking about the one that made you fundamentally doubt love. That one. Okay, after you got crushed, who paid for your pain? Ooh, somebody, it always happens. Somebody just, she goes, the next one. Okay? Because apparently that shit is real close to you. Right. Okay? It was the next one, right? And a lot of the folks around you, okay? And the reason for that is because the natural human instinct is to protect yourself. And love is perhaps the highest risk behavior a human being can engage in. Because you are at risk all the time with no guarantee of safety. It's just words. Okay? And at any moment, if you really love unconditionally, as Pac said, if you love unconditionally, that person can crush your heart in a moment's notice. And that's the work. And kids will crush your heart. You will bury kids. You will have kids quit on you. You will have kids curse you out. You will have kids stomp your heart because hurt people hurt people. And that's how it go. That's not the question. The question is, can you get your heart crushed and come back the next day and throw it right back up on your chest and say, come again? Because I come from the ancestors, and I can take it again, and I can take it again, and I can take it again, because that's what you need, and that's why I'm on this planet, is to give you that unconditional love until you're ready to actually accept it. And if you are currently in a relationship where you are loved, you've already done it. You've already allowed yourself to become vulnerable again. And the truth is, how it happened wasn't Pollyannish. You did not come back into the next relationship and say, I know we just met yesterday, but I really think we should get married. Okay? You came back in at arm's length. And if that relationship has lasted, it's because that person gently pushed your arm down and said, that's all right. That ain't me. And I know you got some baggage, and you can bring that in, and we're going to unpack it one piece at a time until you feel like that case is empty. And then 6 months later, they said, by the way, I have some baggage too. Can we get to mine now? Okay? Because there will be no lies between us. Okay? That's the challenge. Right? Can we be Socratic enough, okay, to live our lives in that way, to model for children what it means to live their lives in that way? Now, to do this, okay, the third component becomes critical. Because I understand what I'm asking. I understand the challenge before us. And there is no way we meet this challenge without being audacious in every corner, every edge, tip to finish, top to bottom of this organization. Audacity has to be supported. To believe that you can treat every child as if they were your own is only possible if you are audacious in your levels of hope. Now, the way we try to do this is by thinking about our particular classroom space, our particular school space, okay, as a micro ecosystem. What I have laid out for you in the front half of the talk is a meta ecosystem that is toxic, that is real, and that is not going away anytime soon. So these babies that we serve are going to continue to bring that toxicity across the threshold. They're going to be carrying trauma. They're going to be carrying pain. They're going to be carrying hurt. Okay? But what we know is that you can create micro ecosystems that heal. One teacher said to me, I'm going to dig where I stand. And that's what you do. You don't wait for his permission. You don't wait for system's permission. No gardener blames the seed for not growing. The gardener understands if the seed does not grow in my presence, in my garden, that's on me. And I got to go back and rework that soil. Some part of the chemical in that soil wasn't quite right for that particular seed. Every child unique, every seed unique, every child a rose. And the roses that don't grow are the faults of the gardeners that didn't get them right. and we're the gardeners. So till your soil. Okay? Dig where you stand, and roses will grow there. 22 years I've been trying this. I never had a perfect year. I never had a perfect semester. I've never had a perfect marking period. I've never had a perfect week. I've never had a perfect day. I've never had a perfect class period, ever, in 22 years. But every day I wake up expecting to, knowing that I won't. And in order to do that, to stay the course, decade after decade in this work, okay, you better be audacious. And for the veteran folks in this room, okay, you modeling audacity late in your career is huge for the junior folks in this room, seeing that the energy stayed high all the way through and embracing and protecting those youngsters who are coming in and saying, I'm going to support you to be audacious. Because you know when young people come in and have the audacity to actually believe they can help all the kids that they come across, then they get told, you'll learn. Okay? Don't be that vet. Be that vet who says, hell yeah. I'm 30 years in this gig and I still believe that. And when they come after you, because they will come after you because you're a little too radical, you come see me and I'll get them off you. Okay? That's how we get a generation of radical educators coming. Okay? And that's the rules of the streets. The big homies got to look out for the little homies. Okay? Now, this is my big homie. And she spent her life looking out for folks like me. And folks like you. And so I'm going to end this talk by playing an interview that Maya did not long before she passed, where she talks, she tells a story that I think perfectly captures what I mean by critical hope. Okay? And critical hope is tethered to what my colleague Sean Jenright at San Francisco State University calls radical healing. These conditions that we've laid out are radical. So healing won't be enough. Right? We've got to engage in radical healing because radical conditions demand a radical response. Right? And I think the story you hear from Maya here best captures what I mean when I think about critical hope and radical healing.
John Singleton was doing his movie. So I didn't know two-pack Shakur. I didn't know six-pack. I had never heard the name. Because in my life, and my age group, you understand? I didn't know that. Tupac's mother wrote me a letter. She said her son had called her right after I had spoken to him. And she wanted to thank me. She said, you may have saved his life. And I thank you, Dr. Angelo.
In that one story, she painted a more human picture of him than the entire media did during his career, you know. People were afraid of Tupac. The media made him like he was this scary thing, and she talked about him like he was a young man in a confusing and difficult situation. And that's kind of what I like about Dr. Angelo, because I know I'm not perfect and whatever, but it's something that she can look at me and she can kind of put the picture together. She knows I'm just a dude trying to figure it out.
Each of us has a chance to be somebody. And it's my delight that you would ask for me so that I could have the pleasure, the joy, the thrill of talking to you.
For me, that's master pedagogy. The ability to find meaning in the mess, the lesson inside the lesson. The question for us, okay, is, why does that matter? I mean, why do those key moments matter so much? And that's the piece that I feel like this field has profoundly lost track of. Because Maya chooses to intervene in Pac's life, circa 1991, right? Because this is when Poetic Justice comes out, so it's probably a little bit before this. According to Pac's own mother, this decision on Maya's part to come out of her trailer and intervene in his life literally saves his life. And if you study Tupac as an artist, as I do, what you will find is the period between 1991 and 1996 when he is murdered in the streets of Las Vegas, the 5 years that, according to Pac's own mother, she buys him with that one decision. If you study Pac as an artist, you will find that that 5-year period was the most productive artistic period of his life. He wrote so much in those 5 years that they couldn't publish it all. This is why Tupac has album after album after album coming out after he's murdered. One of those albums that was written during that 5-year period was released in 2003. It's an album called Resurrection. In 2009, my homie snapped this photo across the world in Kathmandu. It is a picture of 3 brothers standing in front of one of the largest Buddhist shrines in the world. And the oldest brother is in the middle, and he's turned to the right, consoling his middle brother, whose hand is on his head because he is weeping. And the baby brother on the left is watching, learning empathy. What you might not catch about this image is the shirt that the oldest brother is wearing. That is the album shirt from Resurrection. That is why your work matters. Your work ripples across oceans. And it is your work with the Tupacs that ultimately can matter the most. Because your Tupac is the one that is the most likely to speak to the next generation of roses that are trapped under that concrete in a way that actually makes sense to them, in a way that they can actually find up into the light. But the Tupacs are the ones we're the least likely to invest in because they're the most costly to invest in emotionally, spiritually for us. But they're the biggest bang for the buck. Because those are the kids that will come back and transform this community, so we stop talking about individual roses and we start talking about rose gardens. That's what's transformational. We can grow individual roses in the concrete. And then we pluck them and we replant them over in the rose gardens known as Beverly Hills, Piedmont, wherever. And we call that success. Not by the ancestors. Not by my ancestors. Success is when you grow roses and they go away to come back. And they drill themselves back down in that concrete. And they share all that light and all that water and all that knowledge. And they stay to relieve us. So that that next generation comes up and gets that same message. Oh yeah, you going to college. You going to college so you can come right back here. And when that becomes the paradigm, you see the problem with education right now is the paradigm. The point of education in this society is not to escape poverty. The point of education in this society should be to end it. But that's not the paradigm we've created, and that's the challenge. Can we have a paradigmatic shift, okay, to say that the purpose of public schools in this country is to fundamentally eradicate poverty and all forms of inequality? And when we do, then we are truly on the path to being a multiracial, pluralistic democracy. Otherwise, we're just playing games. And this ain't no game. If we can help you in any way on that journey, from any position in this space, please do not hesitate to reach out. In the opening bio, you heard the term Teaching Excellence Network. Okay, this is literally a global network, okay, because we're now working with the Maori in New Zealand. It is a national and international network of educators, school leaders, school officials, community members, everyday folk, okay, that are committed to working together, understanding that it won't just be place-based work. We're going to have to partner as part of a national movement, okay, to make this paradigmatic shift. Okay, if there's any way that we can support you on that journey, please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay? Our director of partnerships is back here. Her name is Carolyn. She's handing out some, I don't know what, okay? But you can hit the email. You can check that out. Connect your colleagues. Hey, and let's start building a movement so this isn't just a sit and get where people are like, yeah, but we actually start moving on this stuff in a way, hey, that is a collective national effort to change the conversation. Thank you.